Hello Cave Dwellers, welcome to the Cave. The Atari 2600 is before us. It's an iconic system. Doesn't matter if you were there at the time in the 70s. I was certainly too young to enjoy it first time around. Mark, not sure about you?
Are you calling me old?
Doesn't matter how old you are, you can recognise this as an iconic system, can't you, Mark?
When I was filming this, my daughter looked at the console and said, "Oh, I know what that is."
Between the console and also the joystick, of course. Anyone can recognise that joystick, it just screams gaming. And that's why it deserves our attention. Whether we've got nostalgia for this system or not, we recognise it as one of the granddaddies of console gaming, and it really does deserve to be respected and treated that way. And as we consider the exhibition space that we're setting up here in the Cave, how can we not have an Atari 2600 for people to come and play? It has to be there, doesn't it?
Can I make a confession though?
Go ahead.
When I was growing up, the machine of the day was the Spectrum.
Yeah.
And by that point, these were kind of old hat. You'd see them at car boot sales and people couldn't give them away. But now, looking back on it, I actually think I've missed out quite a lot.
Do you? Do you? It's incredible, just looking at some of the cartridges on the table here, the years on them, 1988, 1989, still producing games for them. So, it was a much loved machine, but I didn't actually know anyone who owned one. They'd all moved on.
Same story for me, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This video is sponsored by PCBWay. You can get an instant quote on a variety of services, or browse a library of talented makers' designs, add them to your cart, and have them delivered directly to your door.
So when you came across one that was in something of a sorry state, you contacted me and said, "Neil, we've got to restore this for the channel." Just tell us about it. How did you find it?
Well, actually, I didn't find it. Someone contacted me, a lovely lady, who had rescued it from a household recycling waste centre, which in the 80s we would have called the tip.
Or the dump.
The dump. And it had its cable cut off and everything, and she thought that she needed to put a plug on it. Well, obviously, most people will know that that's the aerial. And she took it all to pieces, realised it wasn't the power input, and then threw it all in a box and put it in the shed 10 years ago. One
of those projects I'll get round to one day.
Yeah.
But it rotted in a shed. So she delivered it to you. What was your first impression of it? Did you hold out much hope for restoring this one?
Just to put it into context, it came to me in a Poundland tub, okay? And I was assured that all the screws were there, Neil.
Were they, Mark?
No, they were not, Neil. And it was a bit of a puzzle to go through it, but yeah, did I hold out much hope for it? Yeah, I think I did, because just taking the parts out, I realised it was built like a tank.
Yeah, it's certainly seen better days, hasn't it, Mark, looking at the footage of it there?
It's discombobulated.
Yeah, so it prompted you to bring it here to the Cave and get to work on it.
I did.
And why don't you talk us through the restoration?
So the first port of call is to see if it actually works. So with that in mind, I got the boards out, made sure everything was there, as you can see.
And the boards aren't looking too bad. They've been pretty well protected in the case. They're a bit dusty, a couple of odd splodges around the switches. Can I spot that? Yeah,
I'm not sure if that's some kind of flux, but it's in the wrong place for flux because it's just on the edge of the board. So
you don't think it's sweaty fingers on the switches, do you?
Well, I don't know. If somebody's sweating that colour, they might want to see their general practitioner soon. Obviously, there's been some fluid in here because we can see there's corrosion around some of the aluminium elements, which is kind of normal for the Atari 2600.
I've got an example that displays exactly that on the switches. It's all corroded, so it's heartening for me to see what a good job you've done on this restoration. It gives me hope that I can do the same with these switches. So what was your approach to testing it? Did you just plug it into the mains and turn it on, or were you a bit more sensitive in your approach, Mark?
The only reason I didn't plug it in and just go for it is because it's only got RF, and they can be a pain to tune in anyway. So if there was anything wrong, I wouldn't know, and I didn't want to sit there for hours trying to tune in something that perhaps wasn't working. So I thought I'd start by testing these electrolytic capacitors. So we tested the first one, and as you can see, that's come out pretty good. Then we moved over to this smaller capacitor, and I'm trying to test it in circuit, but the tester can't quite detect the capacitor, so I have to lift a leg. I'm going to test it. As you can see, it's massively high resistance, so that could be the reason that it ended up in the dump to begin with.
Right. Nothing to say that might not have happened in the dump. It's not conclusive that was why it went in there, but it's one indication.
It's certainly something that's got to be changed, but then we've hit a problem, Neil. I don't have that capacitor in an axial format, so I had to do something which I'm ashamed of.
Confess all, Mark.
I had to take a radial capacitor and bend it to shape and use it in place of an axial capacitor.
I don't think Nolan Bushnell would mind that. I think he'd be pretty pleased with that, so long as it's working.
Swap that capacitor out. That informed me when I looked at the main board that you can see here that this capacitor is exactly the same value, exactly the same package format. It's probably dead as well. But for the viewers at home, I thought we'd test it anyway. So I hooked this one up, and this one I could test in circuit, and we can see that it's got a similar degradation, and really it should be about 0.6 ohms. So that's got to come out, and Neil, you're not going to like what I've got to say. I had to replace it with a radial capacitor bent to shape.
I'm fine with this. I'm fine with this.
I'm so ashamed.
Stop worrying.
I'm so ashamed. I'm going to have to go to retro confessional.
So 2 problems identified, fixed. Are we ready to game now? Can we switch on?
Well, I was ready to test it, but then I looked at the control panel, and the power switch is unfortunately floppy and lifeless.
So what did you do with that? Is it a standard switch that you could just replace it with, or did you fix it up?
I did have a look around to see if I could find a standard switch, but I couldn't find anything that would fit. So I hopped on eBay. I typed in Atari 2600 switch, and it came up £20
Wow, for a single switch.
for one that someone had clearly just ripped out of another console. So there's
So it's £120 if you want to replace the lot.
basically, and there's 2 problems here. One, it's £20, and 2, I can't support people who are gutting consoles for parts.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I decided just to pull it apart and see what was going on inside.
And when you opened it up, was it obvious what the problem was?
Yeah, the spring contacts, these 2 pieces of metal, had been squashed down, and also it was really dirty. So I cleaned it up, used some contact cleaner. I used a fiberglass pencil on the surface contacts, retensioned the contacts, so I bent them out again, and then I put the switch back together.
Leaving me with absolutely no contact cleaner here in the cave, so thanks for that, Mark.
Well, it's not my fault that you only had 1 can of contact cleaner. This was a big project.
So now you've figured out how the switches are put together, did you then service all the other switches, or were they okay?
They felt okay. Looking at the dirt in the first switch, I thought they might be dirty, so that's why you have no contact cleaner left.
That went into all the other switches then. Just a squirt, on, off, just to clean out any dirt, and that seemed fine, did it?
Yeah, they all feel mechanically spot on. It's just the power switch that was flopping around.
So 2 capacitors replaced, you've got the power switch sorted. Is it time to test it out now?
Well, one of the reasons that a 2600 doesn't turn on sometimes is because it can't detect the cartridge in the slot due to dirt in the slot or dirt on the cartridge. So,
and you need to have a game in, don't you, for it to actually display something? Yeah.
Exactly. So, preempting that, we clean the slot. And I have a small piece of thin mylar, which I use with a bit of J-cloth wrapped around it, soaked in contact cleaner, and it's just the right size to push into the slot and get the contacts nice and clean. With mylar being a thin flexible plastic, it's exactly the right thickness for the slot. It doesn't bend the pins back. With the J-cloth, you can see any dirt coming off. As you can see here, there's quite a lot of dirt coming out. So that would have potentially stopped the console turning on with the cartridge in the slot. Now, we've changed 2 capacitors, we've fixed the switch, we've cleaned the slot.
Can we game now?
I've got a cartridge, I gave it a quick blow, and then popped it into the console, hooked it up.
And when you say hooked it up, are we trusting a 40-year-old power supply with this thing?
Well, I don't have the power supply, so it's not an issue of trust at all, because I don't have it.
So we got out the bench power supply, didn't we? And 9 volts is what you need for this thing. It's one of those power adapters originally that had the horrible 3.5mm jack like you put in your Walkman. I really don't like them. I don't know why they chose to use them, but obviously it was cheap and cheerful at the time. So 9 volts in, and what happened when you powered it on?
Well, it worked.
Wonderful.
Sort of.
Oh.
Well, yeah, so I managed to tune the TV in via RF, and I got the game on the screen. But it was really noisy, but there's an additional problem. If you even breathe heavy near the power switch, the whole thing cuts out or flickers. And if you turn it on and off again, sometimes it doesn't come back on.
And was this to do with your original power switch repair, or was this something else?
Well, I know that the power switch repair absolutely worked because I tested it with a meter.
Just a simple continuity test, on or off?
The problem lies elsewhere. So that's when I took the board up, turned it over, and this is what I found.
Ooh, that doesn't look good, Mark.
No, there's a bit of movement on that, as you can see.
Just a bit.
The good news is it's easy to fix. So I added some more solder, freshened up those joints, and then I went and I checked all the others. But this does lead me to believe that this console probably doesn't work because I think it was dropped at some point in its previous life. It's been dropped on the power switch, it's pushed those leaf spring contacts in, and it's also cracked those solder joints.
God, you're like a retro detective. I think that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
So, but with that fixed, we're still stuck with the same problem on the screen. It's really noisy. So I've found this Composite Mod Kit. Do you mind if I install it in this console?
Be my guest, Mark. Go ahead.
Now, Composite Mod isn't the best, but it's got to be better than RF.
And when you say it's not the best, presumably what gamers strive for is an RGB output as the best, RF being the worst. But to be honest, I think sometimes you can take it too far, especially with something like an Atari 2600.
Yeah, the Atari 2600 has graphics that you can only refine so much. So, following the instructions here, there's 4 components that need to be removed from the board. We'll whip those out really quickly. And then it's just 4 wires connected to the board. I'll route the cable underneath the cartridge slot and solder the 4 wires into the board as indicated on these instructions.
As far as difficulty goes, where does this sit for anyone watching who might want to try this themselves?
It's pretty easy, but then again, I have a desoldering gun, which doubtless made it a lot simpler.
And there it is, that's the mod in. Looks pretty good. Are you confident that would work?
I'm always confident,
Of
yeah.
course you are. And there was no modification needed for the case. You just came out the same place as the original RF wire came out, didn't you?
Yes, I came out the same hole. So next up, I've got this large piece of aluminium. Now, obviously, aluminium must have been a fairly common natural resource back in 1977 because this thing is huge. Look at the size of this, Neil.
Probably accounts for most of the weight of the console.
I think if you hit someone with an Atari 2600, it's manslaughter at least.
It's a common question, isn't it, that comes up. What's the most lethal console if you had to grab one in an end-of-the-world situation or a zombie situation? So you go for the 2600.
Well, actually, strictly speaking, if it's only consoles, 2600, but if you're including home computers, it'd have to be the CPC 464.
You need the range.
Yeah, because it gives you that extra 1.5 foot of swing.
Anyway, back to the 2600.
So this large lump of aluminium is, there's not a lot going on. Apart from this part here is where the cartridges slide in and out. And as you can see, there's a lot of oxidization, this white powder. So to clean this off, I'm using a magic sponge. You sometimes see these advertised for getting the children's crayons off the walls and stuff, but they're actually slightly abrasive. So it's really handy at cleaning metal surfaces.
I had a similar problem when I was refurbishing the Atari 800 XL here. Although it doesn't contain the huge chunk of aluminium on the inside, it does still have the metal flaps on the cover of the cartridge slot, and that had the same oxidization. But they've obviously moved away from putting chunks of metal into their machines by this point for a cost saving, either in the materials or no doubt in the shipping of the things, because it's so heavy. And probably also to do with changing regulations in terms of the emissions, the RF emissions from the machine. So that big chunk of metal perhaps helped with that.
I think it could probably block X-rays. It's huge.
And now we get onto the bit that I know our audience love, and it hasn't happened on the channel for a long time because of the move, because we haven't got the new lab set up here properly just yet. We're just working on what we've got, and that's a good old cleaning montage. So sorry it's been a while. Enjoy it, cave dwellers. When you're cleaning something like this, black plastics, you're never quite sure how much dirt and filth is going to come off of it. And also, for people who know the 2600 quite well, they'll notice there's something missing around the switches.
Yeah, the rather iconic orange banding around the edge of the switch bezel is unfortunately worn off and is no more. And it is the case on many consoles.
Certainly the case on this other example that I've got on the table here. There's still a little bit just at the bottom, but I would say a good 70% of the orange is just rubbed off. And it's not like someone would have gone around with their finger deliberately rubbing that. It's just with age, it's just come off.
I think it's because it's such a raised surface.
Yeah.
Any paint you put on there is going to come off, but we can fix that.
Oh, you've got a way of fixing that?
I have. I've sourced a special pen.
And is this special pen of yours known amongst the Atari 2600 community, or is this a new solution that you've come up with?
Well, I mean, I just searched for it on Google, so I wouldn't go so far as saying it's my new solution. But this is the Fly C Graffiti 0.7mm extra fine pen, and it's almost exactly the right colour for the bezel.
It looks phenomenal. From what I can see that's left on this and your restoration over there, it looks like an exact match.
It works pretty well. Now, I did apply it, and then I thought I'd do the rub test about 10 minutes later when it looked dry, and it came straight off. So I repainted that section, left it overnight, gave it a little rub test this morning, and it didn't come off. So I think it needs to, settle, dry, cure.
Give it overnight at least, yeah. And it's a great result. It looks really good.
It really is. And even if you do dint it, and I did dint it, you can touch it up again dead easy with this pen.
Okay, this is really coming together now, Mark. And the plastics, they weren't that black when they went in. They'd faded a bit over time. So what have you done to restore that?
Yeah, they were fading. They had a couple of white marks. So I used a product called Simonized Jet Black Trim Restorer. As you squirt it out of the bottle, it looks like a thick black cream. But as you're spreading it around on the console, it starts to take on this sort of look of an oil with a grey suspension in it, because I was kind of worried that if it went over anything that wasn't black, it might stain it, but it didn't, and you can just wipe it straight off.
Yeah, did you look for this brand specifically or not? Because I've used Back to Black, I've used Bondo Black and lots of other brands on things like behind us we've got the CPC 6128, which isn't actually black, it's more grey, but it brought it up nicely. So was there something about that specific product, or was that just what was available?
I had a look at all the different reviews because I wanted something that wouldn't come off on your fingers and wouldn't dry streaky. And this came up really well in the reviews.
And you applied it with a brush?
I did. I applied it with a brush, but it wasn't drying very well. It was kind of glooping together. So I started spreading it left and right with a brush. And as I was putting the brush on, I hope you don't mind, I used your hairdryer to dry it as I went.
And that's come up beautifully. Not quite as shiny as my head. You've got the nice matte black finish. It looks as good as new, Mark.
It really does. It's much, much better than I ever expected it to come up. And the nice thing is, it doesn't print off. So if you touch it, it doesn't come off on your hands. And sometimes when you use these products, if you touch them with your finger, you get a really obvious fingerprint. It doesn't seem to do that either. So I do think that this is probably a winner for retro, this product.
When it comes to using these on cars, it does fade over time, but as I've seen on my 6128, because you're not driving it on a road every day, it's not being hit by the elements, it actually does last a long time, and I imagine it'll be the same with yours.
That's something that it said in the reviews as well. It said that you might have to top this up after a couple of weeks of heavy rain. So I thought that's probably quite a good gauge for it lasting quite long.
If it rains in here, we've got problems.
If it rains in here, we've got bigger issues than this product. So, I think you'll agree it's looking good so far.
Incredible, yeah.
So at this point, I thought about reassembling the machine, and I'd already had a little bit of a go at cleaning one of the toggle switches with some Brasso, and it came up okay. So that gave me the confidence to then try the others, and I thought I'd do it before I put the machine back together for easier access.
And Brasso is a really useful thing to have in your toolkit. Not just for that, but I'm told it's good for just getting out light scratches, just to polish them out with Brasso on plastic. Haven't tried that yet, have you?
No, but I've got a product called Megoise, which is actually a plastic polish. So it's a very fine grinding paste.
Probably costs a lot more than Brasso then.
It probably does.
So it might be worth a little test someday. We can see if Brasso's good for that.
We've certainly got enough stuff here for the exhibition area
we have.
Polish up. I think we can try all manner of solutions. Tried the Brasso, came up okay, but I was wondering if I could get it a bit shinier. So I have a special polish called Auto Sol Metal Polish, and I use it for chrome, all kinds of stuff. And as soon as you put it on the metal, it kind of goes black. And I'm not sure if it's grind or anything, but it really works well. So I tried that. In the end, it didn't come up much better than the Brasso, but it does require a little bit of effort.
No restoration is complete without a bit of elbow grease. So did you have to put in the work to get this polished up?
Yeah, I had to put in the work of leaning over to the drawer and getting out my Dremel and polishing wheel. I've got a small buffing wheel, and I use that for polishing up the switches. You have to be careful because it can be slightly abrasive, but the good news is it worked well, and as you can see, the switches are all now free of oxidization.
I can see them glistening in the light from here. They look fantastic.
So, on with the reassembly. Now, if you look on your Atari 2600 that you've got there, Neil, you can see through the switches you have dust covers.
Let's have a look. Yeah, I see them.
They're kind of a black sponge, a round black sponge. Unfortunately, as you can see here, these are all rotten. In fact, the more you touch them, the more they rot. They're just falling apart into actual dust.
What can you do about that then? Is that a case of just having to take them out and forget them, or can you replace them?
Well, I tried to take them out and I tried to forget them, but I just couldn't deal with it because it didn't look right. So I decided I would make my own.
One of those things that you might think to be simple on the face of it, but if you don't get it right, it's going to look wrong. It's going to look really wrong. So how did you approach this?
Well, the original ones were circular and I knew there was no way I could cut them circular. So I opened it up and I used my brain. And then when that went wrong, I decided to approach it methodically. And then when that went wrong, I decided I'd just wing it. So I took some black material that I just had hanging around the house and I cut some pieces which cover the aluminium in both switch positions, and then I took a scalpel and I cut the middle out square so it will fit over the switch.
And how did you affix that material onto the control panel?
I just left it loose like the original one. The first time I put it together, unfortunately, I left too much hanging over the sides and it blocked the screw holes. Then with a little bit of trimming, eventually it all went back together nicely. And
allegedly Mark has 6 Atari 2600 sized holes in his curtains at home now.
Don't tell the wife. So on this AV mod kit, Neil, it's got a cable which you generally would plug in through the outside of the case, but I fed it from the outside of the case through the original aerial socket hole and I connected it inside the console to give that tethered cable feel that we're all used to with the Atari 2600. I wrapped it around these posts and added some of my favourite hot snot.
So surely now it's all cleaned, it's all tested, it's ready to go, you've got the mod in there. Can we put it back together?
Yes.
Okay, and does it work?
No. No, it didn't work. And I'm not going to say it's my fault because it probably is. And I don't like admitting blame. But I think I followed the wrong instructions for installing the composite mod.
So when you say the wrong instructions, did you have instructions for a different mod or?
It was the instructions which came in a box full of mods. And I think that what I've done is I installed the deluxe mod using the standard mod instructions.
Right.
When I went to the website, I found completely different instructions.
Okay, how much did you have to change then? Was it a lot of work to rectify?
Not really. All I did is I left the audio cable in the original position because that was correct. But I cut the other ground, 5 volt and video cables, brought them out, removed the modulator and just put them in where the modulator was. Straight away it burst into life.
Well, this isn't really a tutorial video for anyone who's trying to do this mod. So if you're trying it, do double check the instructions and not the footage from earlier in this video because you'll make the same mistake as Mark. But we got there in the end, didn't we?
Yes, a lesson learned.
And that's it done. And I can see it across the room here. It looks fantastic. But I think we should really set it up and we should play some games with it. And we've got a nice 70s sideboard over there, which I'm not quite sure where I'm going to put it in the exhibition space, but I think it would be perfect for the Atari 2600. Unfortunately, I don't have a late 70s television to go with it, but these things were used well through the 80s. So we'll hook it up with a CRT.
Yeah.
We'll have a go with it and see how it plays. And I'm interested to see how good the picture is with that composite mod. Mark, it plays as good as it looks. You've done a great job on restoring it. Always surprises me when we play the 2600. I always get into my head that the graphics are just blocks, just squares, but it's not that limited, is it?
No, that was my memory as well of the 2600 back in the day. I wasn't interested, it was blocky, it wasn't like the Spectrum, but actually looking at the graphics, especially when it comes from sort of the 1980 to 1988, 89, the graphics were quite impressive. We turned it on and went, That's really impressive.
Yeah, I would sit and play some of these games instead of perhaps my ZX Spectrum or something like that. The games have evolved that much. Anyway, it's not about the games, it's about the restoration, and it looks fantastic. Anything you would have done differently if you went back and did it again, Mark?
Well, I think we're probably going to have to revisit the machine. I think the colours could be a bit bolder. It seems a little bit dark. We had to turn the TV up, didn't we, on the brightness?
Oh, the colours on the picture, yeah.
And looking around some popular forums, it could be that the little green capacitors, I think they're polyester caps, could be tired and need replacing, and that could well fix that. So that's something that we can look at.
You know, people always say when we do these things, oh, why do you always just recap everything? You know, get to the bottom of the specific problem. But actually, it's always worth recapping it when you're in there anyway because of things like that.
That's right, and ruling out the caps can then help you troubleshoot in other ways. So yeah, with the polyester caps, I wouldn't naturally change those in the machine, but reading the forums, people have changed them and it's improved the video output. So that's something that I'd look at.
And something I noticed, as wonderful as your orange surround was on the good one,
Here we
is
go.
the unrestored one, a little chip came off on your orange paint, didn't it?
Yeah, and I think this actually harks back to what happened to all of the bezels back in the day.
Originally, of course, yeah.
Yeah, because it's such a raised and small piece of plastic. I think what's happened is it's so easy to knock, it's so weak. So I think maybe it might be worth looking at maybe some kind of clear varnish. I don't know if clear varnish comes in a pen or something that can protect that.
You can borrow one of my clear nail varnishes, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah.
All joking aside, that would probably work pretty well.
That would probably work.
Yeah. Well, it's been a great restoration. Thanks for sharing it with us, and such a good addition to the exhibition space so that you can hopefully come and play it and enjoy it. And I've got a good idea as to how to restore this one now, so it's always good to have one in reserve just in case.
That's right. You can never have too many, especially for that zombie apocalypse.
Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you to Mark for coming and doing this restoration for us today. And as always, take care and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So 2 down, Mark. You've identified 2 definite problems and solved them. Is that it? Are we ready to game? All working?
Well, I thought so, and I was ready to hook it up when I looked at the controller board and noticed that the main power switch has, well, some kind of physical damage.
Right.
I'm not going to get home tonight, am I?